So, I don't know if anybody watched last week, but we were talking about using the Enneagram as a tool to help you understand why some people bug you and then why you bug other people, even people that you love, actually, maybe even more so, those sort of people, or people you work with closely. And I took some time last week to give you a tool and maybe an assignment to work on, so you could go to a website, and it was on a worksheet that was put on the same Facebook page, on Without Walls Vineyard Facebook page, and you could go there and you could look at your type combined with other types, and you could see what the strengths of that combination was, those two types, and what the potential pitfalls were. So I hope people had an opportunity to go do that. I use that all the time. I use it in my work. I can prepare myself for, important conversations. So, yeah. So anyway, if you want to catch up with that, it's posted here. I was wearing an orange shirt. You can look down at the post and you can see that last week I spoke on that. So I'm going to just push on forward. Tonight I wanted to really talk about what we think we're communicating versus what we are communicating. And I think in times of stress we try and act a particular way, but I think under stress sometimes we let our guard down a little bit. And so tonight I wanted to talk about the difference between what we think we're communicating and what we actually are communicating. And I feel like the Enneagram is a tool that can help you identify things that maybe are not immediately apparent to you. They might be apparent to everybody else. So each personality type has a talking style, a style of talking that you're used to. It seems natural to you, but there are probably aspects of that talking style that are invisible to you. But, as somebody that works with people, I do a lot of interviews for a manufacturing company, and so I can tell you that if you're going for an interview, the way that you communicate and what you communicate is very important, and a lot of people in interviews are very aware of their communication. Whereas when they're at home or in their familiar surroundings, they don't really think much about what they're communicating. But yeah, as I said, in an interview situation, you become extremely aware. So if you think with me, if you're going to go for an interview, what do you think about in terms of communication? What type of things do you take notice of? And I can tell you right now, sometimes people rehearse with someone else before they go for a big job interview. They say, ask me these questions, how does it sound? So they rehearse a little bit. A lot of people, they are very much more aware of how they make an entrance in an interview, where they put their eyes, the way they reach out their hand for a handshake, how they sit. They've already thought about, how they present themselves as far as the type of clothing, what their body posture's like. And then in the interview itself, they try and look attentive and thoughtful. And so there's a lot of things going on in an interview situation where you become extremely aware of the way you're communicating or how you're coming across. But that's not normal. Most of us don't do that. But we still are coming off in a certain sort of way, even though we don't think about it. So statistically, they've done a lot of research about human communication. And if you think of yourself as the sender of the message, right, and whoever you're sending the message to, so I'm sending the message to you, you're the receiver of the message, right? And that's how communication works. So in research, when they do research about what is the message the receiver receives, okay, this is how statistics tell us and research tells us that only 7% of what we say is what's received by the receiver. So 7% of what we say are actual words. 38% of what's received has to do with the tone. It's the way we say it. It's the tone behind the words is 38% of what communicates the message. But 55% is the non-verbal. So it's facial expressions, it's hands gestures, it's body language. 55% is what the receiver receives. So it's 7% with words, 38% tone, and 55% facial expression and body language, right? So now, as a message sender, like we all are, we think we're pretty good with our words, but are you aware of what your tone and your body language is communicating? Are you aware that because of your personality, you actually come across in a different sort of way than maybe you think you are? So that is really, that is really an interesting thing. And when you look at your personality, and particular, you can do a Google search on Enneagram types and talking styles. And when you do that, you'll come up usually with a list of words that are typical for that Enneagram type. So, for example, for me, a type 7, the enthusiast, these are the sorts of words that it says that I come across as. So when I'm talking, I come across as high energy. And that probably is true because I know when I preach or do anything, I feel like I've run a marathon after I've finished doing it. So, you know, like if I talk a lot through the day, I get peopled out. But I think it's because as a 7, I sort of try and turn myself on and really be alert. But it takes a lot of energy, and I come across probably as high energy. My talking style would be more fun-loving. I tend to keep things, unless I'm angry, but generally speaking, I tend to be fun-loving in my talking style. Entertaining's a big deal. I hate boredom myself personally, and I try not to be boring in the way that I communicate. So I might use humor, or I might, I try and be a little entertaining. Also storytelling. I know the power of stories 7s do, and they can get really into a lot of storytelling. Obviously, as a 7, I'm an enthusiast, so I come across as enthusiastic about what I'm saying. But the last 2 words I don't like. The rest is okay. But the last 2 words is evasive and exaggerating, I can come across as. So 7s do not like to be trapped, so we will avoid a potential what we feel like is an entrapment in a conversation and try and evade it. And exaggeration, like because we're enthusiastic, we're prone to exaggeration. So when you think about my talking style, and as I think about it, I need to pay attention that when I am exaggerating, I call myself out on it, or I'd say, I oversaid that. It wasn't really that much. So, and that's very important for me to do that and to understand it. Also, with some of the other things, words that I just spoken about, the tone, because I'm enthusiastic, I'm high energy, I might be very difficult to disagree with. It might take a lot of effort for people to disagree with me. So another word could be passionate, right? And so I combine that with my age, my grey hair, and the fact that I'm usually up the front or in leadership. I realize my personality, if people are going to approach me and want to really say something to me, I have a lot of work, and I need to think about verbally and the way I sit and how I position myself in an interview or anything like that. It's my job to lower the drawbridge so they can communicate with me. So my words, tone, and body language as a 7 has got great advantages, but if I'm not careful, it can have some disadvantages. So for me, I've experienced people saying, especially people I'm leading, like the train has already left the station. I've already made up my mind we're doing that. And so they don't really feel like they can throw in an objection or they don't like it. And so I need to be aware. What's funny about that is that's rarely what I think from my side of the thing, but it's often what people perceive of me. And the Enneagram has helped me realize that I need to be more careful about how I communicate. That my greatest strength, being an enthusiast, can also be a door shutter for other people. So I just wonder if you were to think about your personality, you know, how do you come across? So I'm going to pick another one here. I'm going to pick a, I'll pick a 2 right now, the helper. Their talking style is 2s tend to be very effusive in their praise of other people. So much so that it can sound a little bit exaggerated, but they tend to shower praise on people because they're very relational. So their communication, they often, 2s are quite known for getting a little bit closer than they should, maybe to a person even physically when they communicate, but they are very good at making the other person feel cared for in their language. So 2s are very heartfelt. There's a lot of emotion, like maybe a 2 will tear up about something or laugh freely, or they will exhibit a lot of emotion when they're communicating. And helpful, you know, like they listen and they even try to identify while someone's talking how they can help the other person, and they can be that way. So they're complementary, but then because they want to be helpful, their language can sort of slip over into becoming managerial, in the sense that they so want to be helpful, the other person often feels now they're being managed by the 2. Okay, and so a 2 has to watch in their communication style. They need to be watching that they don't slip over into making the other person feel like you're trying to manage their life, or you're trying to, you know, get them into a place that will be better. This will be better for you if you listen to me and follow these sorts of things. So again, you see with the enthusiast like me, my enthusiasm can squelch people and make them feel like the train's left the station. But with a 2, because they're helpful, people can feel overhelped or overmanaged. And so what are your words, tone and body language? What do you need to do to monitor that? And so I found using the Enneagram really helpful in that regard as well. So I'm going to pick another one. Why don't I do a 5? Shall I do a 5? Barbara said, let's do a 5. So 5s in their language. I work very closely with a good friend that's a 5, and so I can't help but think about him while I'm talking about this. 5s are very technical, they're very articulate, and often it depends on what it is, if they're educationalists, if they're spiritual directors, if they're engineers, if they're program managers, if they're pastors, they will often use, and they love to use, words that are really apt in that particular sphere. So they're quite technical in their language, and they use the word, and they don't mind explaining what that word means. They're very knowledgeable, and they've got an expanding sort of knowledge. They keep building their vocabulary. Words are important to them. But they can come across as unemotional and disconnected. As not always, I'm not saying always, but one of the things, because they talk so technically and because they're so precise in their language, they might come across as not being as empathetic as maybe other people are, and they can seem a little bit cold or detached, and they can also come across sometimes as a little bit high strung. That word means sort of, what's high strung mean? What do you think that means?
Uptight?
A little bit uptight, yeah, a little bit uptight, like because again it's this technical, and so if they're involved in a discussion and they might be saying, yeah, but you promised this or you did that, and they can't get off, what's not right about it, and it's difficult for them. So again, I guess with a 5, in their communication style, they might feel empathetic, but they probably need to work on expressing what they feel and realize they can come across a little bit too sticking to the facts. Now that's not always true, and it's particularly not true if the 5 has a 4 wing. It's a little bit different to that, because that softens them a little bit. And they can be, I'm going to be honest, the sort of the flavor you can get from a 5 is a little bit like a little bit eccentric, a little bit like they're in their own world, and it's because they're so knowledgeable about things that they don't really relate to where maybe their receivers, the people receiving their message, where they're at in it. So 5s need to make sure they really think about how the others are receiving this, where they're at. And a healthy 5 is really good at onboarding though, and they use their knowledge and they can manage to build a bridge to help people to get into that domain. But they've got to work on that a little bit, because they're usually pretty far ahead of most of the other people in the room, and so they can come across that way. I'm going to talk about a 1 a minute here, and then I want to go on to something else for the last few minutes about communication styles. So if you joined in late, I'm just saying that only 7% of what we say is received by the receiver of our message, 38% is tone, and 55% is body language, and that's how we come across. So we often focus on our words. So we now are going to talk about I think I'm going to go with an 8, because 8s are they come across as bold, direct, pretty matter of fact, and can appear to other people to be a little bit brash, but they're very impactful. Like they're usually not, they don't have a lot of words, but their words have a great impact for good and not good. And they also are very empowering to the underdog, but they're very very critical of victims, right? So if someone's really trying to get ahead, they will communicate in such a way it will lift them up. But if somebody is like whining, 8s have a really hard time. And they don't mind being offensive. They don't mind causing offense. And that can be good or bad. I mean, that's where the boldness comes in. And they tend to push the limits. They often can be a little on the crude side in their humor or something like that, or go right to the edge. And they can be that way. They're quite bold and they're quite strong in their communication. So one of the things that I work with 8s on is, they need to know how to use their power wisely. They've been gifted with power, and especially in their communications. Their power can kill or it can uplift, and so they need to know how to use that power wisely. So the other thing I want to talk about is not just, words, tone and body language, and I just ask you to have a think about, what is it that I'm actually communicating? You could ask about it, you could get, how do people treat you? Are there patterns? Like for me, the pattern was, wow, you've already made up your mind then. That was a pattern in my coming back to me, and it really wasn't true, but I had to look at it. So if there are patterns coming back to you, it could be an indicator that you need to look at some of the way you communicate, and the Enneagram might be a good tool for that. The other thing that is, I think, important is I think we need to face the fact that all of us, when we enter a situation, we all, whether we are really thinking about this or not, we all want to present some sort of image of ourselves in a group or in a team or in a social event. And there's an ideal thing that we'd like to present. So some people's image is, well, I'm a very thoughtful person, or it could be, oh, I'm the life of the party, or I'm a very helpful person, or these things the Enneagram calls our personality mask. It's the thing that we like to show to people. And coming with that is the roles that we tend to play. And you might notice you play a different role, like in a family gathering than in a work gathering, or when you're preaching in church, or when you're active in church or somewhere else. We play different roles. And but in all those roles, who you really are is still present, even though you might be acting in a particular role. And with that comes what the Enneagram calls like an energy that you bring. And so just by virtue of the fact that you have a certain sort of personality, you bring a type of energy into the room. And so you may not be aware of it, but when I enter the room as a 7, I often come in as amped up, like I'm already ready to go. Boom, you know, where is everybody? Let's go, let's get this show going. So I'm not a slow starter. I'm like off when it starts. I'm off.
That explains everything.
Yeah, Barbara says that explains everything. But I can also be very restless, right? Because I'm like, if I'm starting to get bored, I'm like, oh, come on, how much longer? And so I have a lot of that energy in me because I want things moving and I want it fast. And if you happen to be a slower mover, I just am the type that wants to get behind you and push. Can we just get going? Can we do this a little faster? I tend to want to keep things airy and light. I don't like things getting too heavy. I don't enjoy that. So I'm quick in my thinking. I also like to, I thought this was me being an Australian, but I like to be a little bit mischievous and tease people a little bit. And that hasn't worked so well in America. In Australia, I seem to can get away with it, but I don't seem to get away with it here. And the other thing is, and you can tell by the way I'm talking, I can be quite fast in the way I speak. Now that's a big deal for me because I work so much cross-culturally. So I have to learn, and I'm actually living cross-culturally too. So I have to learn to slow down and speak more clearly. When I'm in the Philippines, Daisy, I try and, you know, pace my energy a little bit so that I don't freak people out so much. So that's the sort of energy, pretty amped up. 9s, for example, the energy they have, it tends to be, believe it or not, just pretty peaceful. Peaceful, so much so that they can come across as a little bit sleepy or spacey. They may not realize that, they're just sitting there, they're just listening, but they could come across, because they're so peaceful, as spacey and a little bit not tracking with whatever. They might just, like a 9, will often be listening intently, but they wouldn't necessarily be saying, yes, because they're listening. And so people wonder, are you still listening to me? You know, are you hearing me? That sort of thing is very common for a 9. So the 9's energy can come across as not really tracking, which I don't think is the case, but just the way they're wired. Beg your pardon?
That's not very nice.
That's not very nice. Well, that's the energy. Let's look at a 5. No, let's not look at a 5.
Let's go through 1, 2, go through all of them.
Oh no, there's too many to go through. You're gonna have to do your research.
Just quickly.
Okay. 1s can come across, their energy is rigid, stiff, uptight, but they can also come across as polished, well organized, and very self-assured, and they can make everybody else feel assured. 2s can come across as soft on the outside but hard on the inside, and people can sense that. 2s, they can come across as a little bit, I'm going to use the word seductive, in the sense of people go, what's their motive? You know, they're trying to be too helpful, some people interpret that differently. They can also come across as getting a little bit too sticky or clingy, and that's because they want to nurture, they want to help people, they want to embrace people and help them grow. So that can be the energy. Threes come across as being tough, very tough exterior. They can be very energetic, very high powered, very glossy, very often very well dressed and very well presented. But they're also very, very good at sort of mixing and mingling with other people. They can mingle with any sort of class or any sort of socio-economic group pretty easily. Threes are very good at that. So, but they can come across that way. Fours, they come across as flowing and fluid, very sensitive, intense, and sort of melancholy, or very sort of deep is what the energy is. And so you can tell with a four, you know, the energy they bring in is they want to talk about the beauty of something or the sorrow of something, or, you know, how that makes them feel, or what sort of mood that puts them in. So that's how they come across. Fives can come across as prickly or detached, very cerebral. They can feel like they're removed and remote, but they can also come across as I said before, very enlightened and very, they have a lot of wisdom and stuff like that, because people go to them and you usually will get good answers from them. Sixes are very mentally active. They are hyper vigilant. They come across as people who can scan the environment and see something coming on the horizon, so they sort out for advice. But they can often be very anxious because they see what's coming up. They don't know how to deal with it or what they're going to do about it. And they can come across as suspicious because they're loyalists. They're trying to work out, are you one of us or are you not one of us? Are you with us or are you not with us? That's sort of how they are in the way they come across. So they tend to ask penetrating questions. Sixes, in their communication style, whether they realize it or not, they're trying to work out where this person's at. And so they tend to ask those sort of questions. Eights, as I said, come across as intimidating, big, overpowering, usually huge body gestures and things like that. A little bit irreverent and laconic in their speaking style, meaning they do not use many words. They just say what they mean and mean what they say. And a little bit abrasive to people that are, as I said before, acting like victims. But they're great champions for the underdog. So that's really it, and that's all I have time for today. But I think it's well worth you having a look at your words, tone and body language as it relates to your Enneagram type, and see what you might need to work on improving for you to be more healthy. The thing about the Enneagram, I just read this quote again and I wanted to say it. It actually is trying to encourage you to get out of the box you're in. I want to tell you that again. All these things I say, it's not so that you just go, well, that's how I am. The whole point is, once you know about it, you can start working on how do I not let that become just the thing that flows out of me. So words, tone and body language, and also the energy you bring into the room. So thank you for being with me tonight. I hope this was helpful. And yeah, you have a good week.